Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Bourgueil and we're looking at the Yannick Amirault 2019 Rosé des Canucks Bourgueil Rosé. The estate was established in 1977 by Yannick Amirault when he inherited 3.4 hectares worth of vines from his father. Today, Benoît, Yannick's son, works alongside his dad, and they farm about 20 hectares worth of vines in Bourgueil and St-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil. But this wine has a lot of historical significance for the family. In fact, Benoît explained to me that it was his great-grandfather that started to make this wine, and the production method has remained virtually unchanged ever since, which is amazing. And I will get into the production side of this wine, but I'm going to start with the vineyard. So this is coming from 2 hectares worth of vines, about 35 or so years of age, from select parcels in 3 distinct Lieux-Dits in the commune of Bourgueil. The Lieux-Dits are La Chopinière, La Lande, and Les Pins. These 3 Lieux-Dits are within about 500 or so meters of each other, and we're situated about 6.5 kilometers or 4 miles north of the Loire River. Now, if you recall from a previous video, there are 3 distinct terroirs in Bourgueil. We have the recent alluvial soils that hug the Loire River. These are silty, sandy soils that are quite deep with almost zero impact of the tuffeau. And then we have the ancient alluvial soils that are set back a little bit, concentrated in the communes of Bourgueil and Rastigny. These are more sandy, gravelly soils that are a little bit more shallow, so there can be more of an impact of the tuffeau in places. Then we have the côtes, or the slopes. These are set even further back from the Loire. They're on these south-facing slopes where we have a shallower topsoil, so more of an impact of the tuffeau, and the topsoil can have a little bit more clay in it as well. So where this wine is coming from, it's coming from Lieux-Dits that are kind of on the northern edge of where the ancient alluvial soils meets the côte. So we are dealing with more deep sandy soils here. In La Chopinière, we have about 2 or so meters worth of topsoil that's a sandy clay mix. And then in La Lande and Les Pins, we have a deeper topsoil here that's almost 100% sand. The topsoil is about 5 to 8 meters deep. Now, Benoît was explaining to me that these are the parcels that they select year in, year out to make this cuvée. There's reason for this. So first and foremost, the acidities are always really good in these parcels. In addition to that, the fruit profile has a really kind of aromatic quality that they quite like for this wine. And then finally, the maturities actually tend to be a little bit irregular here, which of course for red wine would be a concern because we're macerating the grapes for an extended period of time. But in the case of rosé, where there's no maceration, having fruit that's slightly irregular or some parcels or pockets that are a little bit underripe is not an issue. Now, I will go on record very quickly and say that it's very easy for a winery to make rosé, but it takes a lot of skill to make a great rosé. And with the proliferation of the rosé trend out there, unfortunately, there's a lot of mediocre rosé out there. Rosé that's rosé for the sake of being rosé. And you know what? I love rosé as much as the next guy, but it's getting harder and harder to find these examples of rosé that have intention behind them, have purpose, have authenticity. And the story behind this wine is really what drew me to it and made me want to do this kind of deep dive. Now, from a production standpoint, as I mentioned, they've been making this wine for 4 generations now, and the production method here is direct press. And what's important to note about Cabernet Franc as a rosé grape, or as a grape in general, is that it requires extended maceration for the berry to release all of its juices. Now, in the case of rosé, where we have a direct press, we don't have that luxury of the extended maceration. So we need to be very particular of the fruit that we select to make sure that the berries tend to have a little bit more flesh or pulp to them and thinner skin, so that when we do the direct press, the fruit kind of releases its juices with a little bit more ease. Now, in terms of the fermentation here, the fermentation of this wine is exactly the same as they approach their reds. So we're talking indigenous yeast with 0 sulfur during the fermentation. Fermentation vessel is very critical as well. They choose oak barrels for this, 300-liter oak barrels, mostly neutral, sometimes with a little bit of new in there. And the wine does go through, at least in 2019, it went through full malolactic fermentation. So there's a lot of factors here at play, and because of the lack of sulfur with regards to fermentation, they're treading this razor edge thin line of oxidation. So it requires very gentle little handling in the cellar, in addition to into a lot of technical know-how to pull off a rosé like this. Now the barrels are very significant in this regard because they contribute a certain degree of stability. So rosé does not have any tannin, so the barrel provides a certain amount of tannin that gives this wine some stability so that they can ferment it without sulfur and also bottle it with a low amount of sulfur as well. The barrel also provides an additional bit of sort of weight or roundness or sweetness, or gras as they say in French, or fat to the wine, and that helps to kind of soften the natural acidities of the wine and provide a certain degree of balance in that regard. Now this wine, in terms of the 2019 vintage, they produced about 6,000 bottles of this, and the name does have some significance, of course, Rosé d'Equinoxe, and historically the fermentation of this wine would have finished right around the spring equinox, which is of course why the rosé is named the way it is. So let's get into the wine. Now, the nose is really starting to open up quite nicely, and I should stress off the top that this is a rosé that you should really actually treat more like a white Burgundy. So if you've got a decanter, throw it in there for a little bit, let it have some oxygen. Also, do not serve this out of the fridge super cold as well. You want this to be a little bit warmer in terms of the temperature to really let it express itself the way it was intended. Now the nose immediately, it does have some certain fruit profiles that come through, but it's not like fruit in the classical sense. The first thing that leads is actually spice. I'm getting like this beautiful sort of ginger note. There's a little bit of like a musky white pepper thing going on. And then the next thing that I'm getting is a little bit of an herbal note, like almost chervil or like sorrel. And then there's like a little white flower thing. And then we get to some fruit after that, which is really quite cool actually. And the fruit profile is kind of like a fleshy white peach. There's a little bit of white raspberry here too, maybe even a touch of like a grapefruit zest thing going on, but it kind of goes spice and then herbs and then flowers and then fruit after that, which is kind of neat. Now on the palate, this is really tangy, vibrant acidity, and you get the sense that if it wasn't for the malolactic and it wasn't for the barrel, that acidity might be a little bit too pronounced or bracing. But there is a certain degree of weight to the wine that helps to kind of anchor that acidity and kind of mute it a little bit, which is actually quite nice. Now, I should say that the aromatic profile that was on the nose does come through on the palate, but that's not what this wine is all about. This is all about a textural experience, a structural experience in terms of the palate. It's got really distinctive sort of weight and roundness to the mid palate, and you do have this sort of inherent sweetness to the mid palate as well. But then there's this wonderful sort of cleansing finish and a persistent finish as well. It just kind of lingers there. But the way that the texture of the wine in terms of the mouthfeel dances with the acidity is really where this wine is exciting and makes it a sort of a pleasurable and kind of compelling experience in terms of of how it sort of interacts with you when you're tasting it. Now, this is a really contemplative wine. It requires a certain degree of patience. It also requires food as well. I'm leaning in my head, I'm thinking more protein, like a classic roast chicken with some sort of vegetable forward side dish, like a braised Belgian endive, but also coming into fall where we start to see more root vegetables on our plates, or at least here in North America. I'm thinking stuff like a butternut squash risotto I think would be really fantastic with this wine. But it does show you that it has somewhere special to go as far as ageability. And it is a wine that I will intend to kind of revisit in a year's time, because I think some of that weight in the mid palate might kind of be shed a little bit, and a bit of that sort of weight will become a bit more integrated with the acidity with a little bit of time. But it's such a compelling example of rosé that has such an authentic story, such a purpose and intention behind it, and it is certainly one that I would highly recommend folks seek out for sure. If you've had it before, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, of course, and I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.